Welcome to my channel. Please hit the like button, share, and subscribe. In this video, we'll be touching on the life and times of Rick James. Rick James was born James Ambrose Johnson Jr. in Buffalo, New York on February 1st, 1948. The family eventually grew to 4 boys and 4 girls and were presided over most of the time by a single mother. That mother was former nightclub dancer Mabel Sims, who eventually became known as Mabel Betty Glatton. Mabel was a petite woman, 5 foot 5 inches, who spent most of her career working for 2 prominent black number runners in Buffalo, who reported to Buffalo mob boss Stefano Magaddino. The family lived in the Willett Park Courts housing project on Buffalo's east side, which had been built exclusively for African Americans in 1939. In 1956, they migrated across the Swan Street Bridge into the previously majority white Perry projects. According to Leroy Johnson, Rick's brother, the white children were fine with us until the parents would say something to the children, and the children would then come out and say something like, "My mother told me you're just a nigger." Rick, Leroy, and their siblings often fought with the children. Rick became a skilled fighter, as did Leroy, and both were known to throw a few punches later in life. When the harassment became intense, Leroy said their father and their older brother Carmen beat the hell out of the harassers. After their mother married their stepfather Gladden in 1960, the family moved to a 2-family house on Ferry Street in Buffalo's Cold Spring neighborhood. Gladden's parents lived upstairs, and the rest of the family lived downstairs. Although Rick's mother officially worked as a house cleaner, as Rick sang in his 1981 song Below the Funk, Pastor J, Mama raised me on the numbers racket. Mabel indeed made most of her money by running numbers and administering a numbers racket office. Rick has said his mother worked her ass off every day. She would be out in her snow boots, house to house, under mats, in mailboxes, and behind garbage cans where people would leave their betting slips. She often took Rick and Leroy with her. We would carry a shopping bag with all the money and books, so we could run with it if the cops stopped her. The money from the numbers operation helped Mabel support her 8 children well. Both Leroy and Rick remembered good times and good meals, a 2-level, 3-bedroom apartment, and sufficient clothes for everyone, even when no father was around. Leroy also remembered that their mother employed her own housekeeper and kept 2 new cars for family use, although she parked them blocks away from the projects. Rick's brother Leroy has said their mother's number earnings also financed Rick's musical career until 1973. That year, however, the massive steel mills that had made Buffalo an industrial powerhouse and a magnet for wage earners shut down, and the family's good times were over. Although Buffalo residents still played the numbers, they were now betting pennies instead of dollars. Rick's father, James Ambrose Johnson Sr., was born in Nashville, Tennessee, and lived in Canton, Ohio, before moving to Buffalo. He worked in a Chevrolet assembly plant, then at Republic Steel's South Park Avenue plant, and later in construction. He served in the Navy during the Korean War. James Sr. retired from Laborers Union Local 210 around 1988. And Rick remembered him dressing up in a Shriner's hat and escorting Mabel to an Elks Lodge ball. Later in life, Rick told the California court psychologist that Johnson Sr., also known as Hitchy Boy, for reasons no one can remember, was an abusive alcoholic. Rick also told California criminologist Sheila Balkin that his father was very sadistic to his mother and beat her often. Once in a while, I would try to help her, but my father told me I would get beat if I didn't stay out of it. He told another interviewer that when he heard his father beating his mother, he would wish he was grown enough so that he could kill him. Levi Ruffin, a childhood friend of Rick's and later a member of Rick's Stone City Band, describes Rick's father as a hustler. He hit Rick's mom every now and then, came home when he felt like it, and screamed because his meals weren't cold or hot enough. He was that kind of dude. Johnson Sr. left the family when Rick was 7 years old and eventually divorced Rick's mother. I woke up one morning and he was gone, Rick told Behind the Music. Rick's brother Leroy defended their father, however, noting that after breaking up with Rick's mom, Johnson Sr. partnered with a woman with whom he spent the rest of his life. Although Rick described his mother as an incredible woman, she also passed the abuse she had received from her husband on to Rick. My father would beat my mother on a daily basis, and my mother would take it out on me and in turn beat me, Rick told author Pamela Dres Barris in Rock Bottom magazine. After his arrest in the 90s, he told California authorities that his mother would beat him with a knotted electrical cord for little or no reason, letting out her frustrations on him. Social service workers visited the family's home several times, but Rick said the children refused to leave because they were all a team. As he grew older, his relationship with his mother improved. She became supportive of his musical career and later became his best friend. Nevertheless, his father's abuse, neglect, and eventual absence severely damaged Rick's understanding of how to be a husband and father. The Buffalo ghetto, where Rick was born in the pre-civil rights era, also damaged him, as it did others who lived there, even though it provided the themes for some of his best songs. I always thought that there was something mentally wrong with me, Rick said in 1979, attributing his perceived problem in large part to being black and born in the ghetto, and believing that you can get out. He described the place as dominated by poverty, drugs, pimps, gangsters, prostitutes, and guns. Most black people born in the United States today have a psychological defect. We're born into something that's not what we perceive life to be. Black people are mental patients in the hospital of effing life, and to get well, we have to say we are somebody. We are relevant to life. We can get out of here. Rick devoted much of his life to accumulating enough wealth to avoid ever sinking back into the ghetto. He returned to Buffalo after becoming a music business success in the 1980s, but lived in splendor in one of its suburbs, Orchard Park, rather than in the inner city, and later moved permanently to Los Angeles. Rick began rebelling against his family at an early age, much to his mother's chagrin. Rick's sister Camille, now Camille Hudson, describes their mother as a devout Catholic who went to church all the time and insisted that her children do the same. Camille says both Leroy and Rick were often altar boys until Rick was kicked out because he was a little too hyper for them. Rick was bad, real hard to handle, a real handful. It's possible Rick's rebellious behavior was a typical response to being raised in a strict environment, but Camille provides a different possible cause of Rick's behavior pattern. Both Rick and his mom were hyper. Neither of them could sit down and be still. If you tried to put him in front of the TV, you had to chase him around because he couldn't sit down. His mother thought there was something wrong. My other children were always so calm. But Rick had so much get-up, she once said. She was so alarmed at what might now be diagnosed as attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, ADHD, that she took him to a psychiatrist early in the 1950s. The doctor couldn't explain it, but he didn't think it was a mental problem. Rick, speaking with California psychologist Raymond E. Anderson after his arrests in the 90s, said that he would run away often to get attention. Sometimes he would walk 10 to 15 miles, absorbed in thought. Leroy said Rick began running away from home at age 5, and that Rick dragged him along on their first attempt to escape. Because of their age and the fact that they were dressed like cowboys, their attempt ended at the local police station. When his mother would draft Rick and Leroy to carry her numbers books in big shopping bags while she went door to door on her rounds, the two boys would often cry and wail in protest. Rick told one interviewer, "I hated it. It was so effing cold." Finally, Johnson remembers, during a snowstorm when the buses weren't running, their mother wanted them to accompany her as she crossed Buffalo's Hamburg Street Bridge on foot, even though the blowing snow had cut their visibility to zero. Rick took a stand and threatened to call the cops if she forced him to go. That was the last time she took Rick with her. Rick was often in trouble with the law. As a teenager, he was sent to 2 juvenile homes for stealing vehicles, including a bus, which he stole, he later said, because it was big and there were keys in it. He didn't restrict himself to vehicles. According to Leroy, Rick was arrested as a teenager for stealing some leather jackets from the C&B men's shop in Buffalo. He stayed in it after it closed and then broke out the store after he stole the jackets. It was hardly an intelligent theft. The police tracked Rick home by following his footprints in the snow. Rick committed a very similar robbery and made very similar mistakes just a few years later. Perhaps his love for clothes warped his judgment in both instances. Rick also was a youthful drug user and dealer. He started smoking marijuana at 14. According to court records, he experimented with cocaine and heroin in his teens as well. In April 1978, at age 20, he was arrested in Buffalo for possessing more than 2 ounces of what the Buffalo Police Department quaintly spelled marijuana. Camille was hardly surprised. They could have caught him any day with marijuana, she said. Leroy contributed the mugshot and police report from that 1978 arrest to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame and Museum Library and Archives in Cleveland, where they are preserved. Rick became sexually active at an early age as well. According to Leroy Johnson, Rick started having sex at the age of 9 with a girl of the same age. Rick was always ahead of his time with women, Johnson said. At 15, Rick had an affair with an African dancer in her 20s who was renting a room in his mother's house. Later on, Rick favored prostitutes, both as people and as an inspiration for music, Johnson says, adding, "In our life, hookers were just people. We didn't demean them because of what they were doing to earn a living." As Johnson sees it, sex workers were a part of life, black life. The girls we knew were attracted to pimps, and a lot of them became hookers. He also notes that the sex workers Rick were around were gorgeous, high-end beauties. Drugs and precocious sex weren't Rick's only problems. He tried to avoid school entirely. Levi Ruffin, his childhood friend, says, Rick got kicked out of almost every school he went to. He wouldn't go to class. So they put him in another school, and he wouldn't go to class there either. He didn't like it, and to hell with it. When Rick and his brother were at Catholic school together, Leroy Johnson says one of the nuns tried to discipline Rick by rapping him on the knuckles with a ruler, but Rick took the ruler from her and broke it in half. Rick soon started attending public schools. After being expelled from Buffalo's Bennett High School, he attended Grover Cleveland High School and East High School, but he had dropped out of school entirely by 1964 when he was 15 years old. Ruffin says the reason Rick saw school as a waste of time was that he wanted to become a musician and get out of the ghetto. Stay tuned for part 2. This will be probably 3 or 4 parts. And thanks for listening to my channel. Hit that like button if you like this video. Peace and love.